Welcome to the Feminist Astrologer podcast. This is episode number 2. My name's Carol and I'm the Feminist Astrologer. Before we begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands, skies and waterways of the world. In particular, we would like to acknowledge the Paramount and Nurungiri people who are the traditional custodians of the land that we're on here today. We pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Paramount and Nurungiri nation and extend that respect to all Aboriginal people. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. So, today I would like to introduce to you a very dear friend of mine, Louise Hewett. Louise is a very respected member of the Adelaide Hills and Adelaide pagan community. She is a highly respected artist and feminist in our area, and is of course the author of the wonderful collection of Pictish spirit novels.
And that's just 2 of them.
That's just 2 of them. There are many more. So it is my great honour to introduce to you today my dear friend Louise Hewett. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It is a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. Dear Louise and I have some really great conversations on a regular basis. And more than one time we said, we should record this because there's got to be other women that want to hear this kind of stuff. So now we're doing the podcast where we're getting to do that.
Which is good. Let's hope it goes in the same vein.
Yes. So we're hoping that possibly we can get together once a month and do a podcast together.
A conversation. The best ones are always natural as can be.
So our subject for today is goddesses. And I wanted to particularly look at some Scottish goddesses. Now, I am from Scotland, so this is naturally something that interests me. And Louise also has Scottish heritage, so, you know, we're quite drawn to these goddesses. And Louise features them in her books, so she is rather an expert.
I don't know about that,
things.
But
she is.
I have an expert way of saying what I think in my books.
So perhaps before we get into the goddess side, perhaps Louise, you could give us a little bit of an overview of what the novels are about.
Okay. It's always a hard question because I guess I purposefully made them complicated because life is complicated. But I'll do my best to be brief.
They're really long books.
So. Yes, they are. All of them. In fact, I think the first one is the shortest. And I'm sort of trying to think I'll try and be more brief. With Ice, I wanted to be, which is the 5th book. I thought, right, this one is going to be only 600 pages. But I think it's the longest book. So, so the story was, I'll just give a little bit of background because I think it's really important for context. So I had a wonderful friend who has passed on, Lynn Sinclair Wood, who herself wrote a book, which I'm going to give a plug to if that's okay.
Of course.
Creating Form from the Mist, which was Wisdom and Women in Celtic Myth and Culture. And she had that published in the 90s. I think it was 96 or 7 from memory. And she spoke about modern interpretations. She'd work through the story and then offer the kind of teachings and interpretations that she had as a druid and as a feminist. I have to emphasise that. She was a feminist active in the 70s. Through her artwork and many other things, I'm sure. And she would then offer a context for perhaps interpretation in the modern world. So I read her book, loved it, because it just brought things alive. And particularly, we used to have personal conversations about various things, Bridget in particular, which is also featured in my novels very strongly, and the warrior women. And funnily enough, I don't personally call them warrior women.
No.
Sometimes I'll refer to them as battle maidens or battle women, because I'm trying to portray a different resonance about what that means.
What do you refer to them commonly as?
Well, I have my own little, I guess, prayer that I wrote for the story, and I say that Sgathach, which is one of them, is the mother of discernment. So that to me is the key for what her purpose might be for the modern world. Aoife is the mother of fruitfulness. Beautiful. But those are very brief, obviously, titles, and there are many others in the book. But getting back to the book.
Yes.
The story, I wanted to write a story about sexual politics and how we could try and unpick some of the issues around personal relationships, but also the cultural structure between men and women, to put it very briefly, because it is a huge subject, as I found out, because I had read Rianne Eisler's books, 2 books, The Chalice and the Blade and Sacred Pleasure, and sort of incubated that for 10, 12 years within myself. And then one day thought, that's what I want to write about in a novel. I'm not an academic person. I just had to write a story. And her books sort of raised so many questions and perspectives that really made sense to me. And so that was one of the themes. The other one was I wanted to write about women and strong women, and from a woman's point of view. And that was really important, partly because in my own family, the maternal line is very ordinary domestic women that people would never hear about. You would even looking into family history, there's no this grandmother or whatever did this amazing thing and it's remembered. All the women are pretty invisible,
which is so sad, because they're actually the backbone of the whole family.
Yes, very much line. So. But that's part of that cultural narrative, that it is men who give meaning to culture, historically in a patriarchal or dominator culture. So having a woman's perspective and injecting a lot of respect around that was really important, partly for my own growth and my own sort of retelling myself the stories of my life, how I could change the language that was going on in my head, which is an endless struggle.
So
the strong women and women's voices and the sexual politics and the framework, I wanted to have something that bridged the world. So something that could include the practical everyday life, personal relationships, child rearing, conversations about the environment, and of course the what I tend not to even call spiritual anymore. This is what writing these books has done to me. But I call it relational thinking, the way we relate to everything in the universe, but obviously on our planet and with each other.
Your average listener, you probably would think of these in terms of spirituality and things like that. So I think it's important. It's important to the language that you use is very different, because you've sort of advanced or moved through these stages in your life to see things from different points of view. But the books are very much infused with
spoken about. If there's any explanation, that backs up, say they're talking about a goddess, and then there's sort of material around that to explain either why they've chosen to use the word goddess, or they're talking about spirituality or religion or whatever.
So the main group of characters are all basically pagan people.
Yes, there's a community in the Adelaide Hills, which is was good to write about my own place. And they are trying to live into their values of broader community values, which means, meeting people's needs, survival, trying to be just, but then within that broader community value is a smaller community value, which is what we would call, specific ideas. So that's the Pictish spirit side, and the Scottish goddesses, and like for an example, it would be like the overculture having, or the community having common values, which I don't know whether it does actually, but but within that larger community is Christianity, Islam, pagan religions, people that have special interests, even, sports communities where they have a common interest, and that is like a community within a community.
Right.
So my idea was to have a community within a community, so that the two sets of values don't clash. However, those people who aren't attracted to the Scottish lineage of these goddesses, women, mythic women, wouldn't be interested in that. So they might be going next door to somebody who values the Greek tradition, or any other thing that you could possibly think of. So that was hopefully conveyed throughout the story. It wasn't meant to be completely isolated, although in some ways some of the ideas are quite radical. So they are in a way,
and it's all
very
told
isolated
from one woman's perspective, isn't it?
Yes. So it's a story of her almost coming into her power as a healer through chance, just the evolution of her life, and then one day everything's ready and it just happens. She meets a young man who's, unbeknownst to her at the time, of course, he's actually been initiated into this system on the Isle of Skye with the goddess Sgathach by an old woman who's the teacher, the mentor. In fact, she's the visionary who actually created the Pictish spirit tradition. Right. And then she gets involved with him, but the slightly different twist to the story is that he's also, well, they're both bisexual people, and Adam is the male that she meets. Rasheen, is the main character. Yeah. So Adam is also very attracted to a young man who he thinks isn't really interested. And that's sort of the basis of the first book, is how their relationships develop. Yeah. And it
sets a real basis too of non-traditional relationships, and how you sort of I guess break the rules of what
definitely
what is
breaking the rules
seen as acceptable or normal, or
and that is how I could explore issues of the relationships, issues of sexual politics, and also try to infuse their relationships with the values that are more visionary. I guess they do happen in the world, but definitely a visionary sense of what we can be when we are freed from the pain and the trauma of the patriarchal relationships. So it is very, in some ways, more visionary, but I try to ground it in reality.
Because it's really like Roshin's. I always have trouble with that. Roshin's journey and what she's learning and exploring along the way, and new things that begin to that understandings that she comes to along the way.
She's very in the beginning, I think you could say she is taken by surprise. She is and she's got a strong grounding with her mentors, the elder women in her little community. And she is had a lot of personal grief herself. So she's got a lot of certainty about where she is. But on the other hand, she's as much vulnerable to, as having gone through trauma, what happens in our culture, relationships, even her relationships with her parents, her mother and her father. And, you know, a lot of the things I write about in the end are unexpected. I think, I didn't actually mean to write about that. But it's there, and it's because I've tried to make her a whole person.
Yeah, she's very real. So, you're
she
kind
is
of
to me,
relating to what she's experiencing and feeling along the way.
And also trying to open up a space for the reader to connect on, and, you know, any level, like is this, you know, shared experience of grief or depression or a confused relationship with her father, which came a lot out in the 5th book, which I wasn't expecting either, but I love the process. Anyway, I must not diverge here, so the story really involves Roisin and her personal relationships, and then her coming into her role in the Pictish spirit community, which is like a mentor, an initiator, and one of the main subjects in the book being to do with sexual politics is, of course, sex. And that was quite a bold venture for me, because I was worried about who I was going to upset. And then I thought, who cares?
You've got to do that, don't you? You've got to just eventually just go, who cares? Because it's got to be said, and it's got to be
I wanted to write as honestly as possible, but again, with that visionary impulse. So that was, I feel that's important to say. So with the initiations, and which this is going to tie in, of course, with the goddesses Sgathach and Aoife, is that, especially with the teachings and interpretations I got through Lynn, was that they were teachers of mystery traditions, which included sexual mysteries and how to manage the really intense energies of life. So that is why she's a sexual initiator.
And I think this is really interesting, because I was thinking earlier about how Mars is in Scorpio at the moment, which is a really intense sexual kind of an energy too. And I thought it was really interesting that we have, actually I'd suggested we do this, but I left it up to Louise to choose which particular goddesses that you wanted to focus on. And she said that she'd like to do Sgathach and Aoife. And I just thought, afterwards, it didn't even occur to me straight away, but I thought about it afterwards and went, oh my goodness, it is just such perfect timing to be talking about that kind of energy, because that's kind of the energy around us. And I'd just like to point out that at the time of filming this, Mars in Scorpio is pretty much directly above us. So
wow.
You know,
and the character in my novel, who's one of the young initiates, the character that has an intimate relationship with Roisin, Ben, it's his birthday today as well. So he's a Scorpio.
Happy birthday, Ben.
So he's one of he's not the first, but he is definitely, he's not the first in the sequence of initiations, but he comes into the fold through Adam and wants to learn. His interest is captivated by, you know, the several levels, you know, the woman and Adam himself. So there's obviously the triad of that relationship is a bisexual relationship. Another thing that I wanted to do, I just didn't want to have the standard heterosexual focus, but I wanted to talk about how in the patriarchal society, heterosexuality has been sort of co-opted. It's been weaponized. That's what I say. So being attracted to the opposite, or shouldn't use the word opposite, the other sex is not a bad thing. It's just that it's been weaponized. So I thought, you know, there's a range of characters in the book anyway, but the sort of core relationship is the triad of Ben, Adam and Roisin, and then how I could explore different aspects of relationships and life through that.
Through the lens of their experience and their learning.
And how that the goddesses also, particularly with the Celtic tradition, where you have the wonderful, or I should say the pre-Celtic symbolism of the triple spiral.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is the beautiful image of movement, and everything is, changing and creating constantly.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that it can justify anything, but it means that things do change. Some things change, other things don't, and definitely our understandings deepen and change over time with experience, which again I found just in the process of writing the books so far, that even how the characters changed, how my perceptions have changed. So that really is encapsulated in that symbol, and so the really triangular
the whole story is something that the reader can then grow with.
I think
it takes them on a bit of a journey of exploring all sorts of different things that you may never have thought of before. So they're really very deep stories. They're not simply stories. They're kind of really meant to make you think and evaluate the world sort of around us and our perception of women and men and relationships and just to ask those questions. And so it's amazing.
So they're the kind of main themes, and without giving away too much about the story because it is very involved. But basically Roisin is a mentor and an initiator. So and that's where I don't know if that's a good entrance into talking about
these goddesses. So the two, as I said, that Louise chose were I was really excited that she picked those two because they just fit in so perfectly with the astrology at the moment as well. And they just, I think even just today I posted on my Facebook page a little video from, it was a YouTube video from, I think the name of the YouTube channel is Calendar with a K, K-A-L-A. Calendar. I'm not sure. Anyway, have a look on my Facebook if you missed it. But this is woman, and she is dancing. She's spinning, but she's got the fire. The fire at the skirt on her skirt. Yeah. And I thought, wow, that's really, to me, that's very much that Mars, Scorpio, Sgathach, Aoife, all of those kind of fiery, sexual, intense, initiating kind of goddess energy is encapsulated in that kind of a vision too. So I thought, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, but I just thought that energy of today is really fitting for what we're talking about. What I wanted to do too is just read the little blurb from the back of this one. This is Ice, and this is the latest in the series, so it's not the one you're going to want to start with. But on the back of the blurb, I think you said it was
it's the character of Adam,
and he's kind of reminiscing, and he's thinking about this elderly teacher, I guess that you would call her.
She was I guess, the visionary, the seer who created the whole Pictish spirit tradition out of her own life and experiences, which was a way I also wanted to break with the idea that you needed to have an unbroken tradition, because I was making this up.
So I'll read this little bit on the blurb on the back, if I may. It says here, it wasn't particularly cold, but then I had to remind myself that she was old and not as active as someone my age. Well, physically at least. Metaphysically, she was an athlete. Sgathach, woman in Cailleach's shape. Indeed. And now that I think back on it, she blended with the colours of the season. The brown herringbone, the muted sky plaid, and sometimes a fog and stone grey coloured shawl with a bit of lichen yellow woven through it. sun of the evening caught in her whisky glass, and the red glow of the granite hills in her cheeks when she'd had a nip or two. Her colours, her groundedness. In the landscape was something that made me feel comfortable. So that was the feeling I went with, to stay close to the ground of things. But I felt very uncomfortable in other ways, and she knew it. And she risked it. He took a deep breath, and I stayed.
Mm. Yes.
So
the prologue, I guess I would like to just say, to Mist, the first book, begins with Adam on the Isle of Skye when he is been sent out into the Cullen Hills, the Black Cullen, to bring her something, and she's very vague about what he's supposed to bring back. And these ideas actually came from conversations with Lynn and her adventures on the Isle of Lewis, actually, and in Britain in general and Scotland. But
sounds like a Scotswoman.
It was just sending him out, and so it begins there, and he finds something. He has an experience, and he finds something, and something shifts in him, and he meets Sgathach, which is she is the Black Cullen. This is the ground that I approach it from. That she's the land. So
tell us about Sgathach.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the story comes that most people know of. Sgathach comes into knowledge, I guess, through the story of Cuchulainn from the cattle raid of Cooley, which is an Irish story. I'm not going to try and pronounce it in Irish. I tried this morning. I'm thinking Tarnbo Culnia or something like that. But anyway, I can't pretend I know how to pronounce it properly. But in that story, Cuchulainn is wooing Emma, who, her father doesn't really want Cuchulainn for her husband. Cuchulainn himself is meant to be, the hero of Ulster. He's very famous character in myth, which is interesting, a contrast to how unfamous Sgathach is.
Yeah.
I mean,
when
possibly
she was his teacher.
Possibly nowadays that's different because of especially the flourishing of paganism and mythology. I think since I first started working with this story, I hardly ever heard of it, and we didn't have the internet back then.
No.
And it being in Australia too, a lot of things were hard to get hold of, and when you're trying to get in touch with not only your ancestry but find meaning in a earth-based practice that's not trying to rip off the kind of Indigenous people where you are, it was a struggle. But anyway, Cuchulainn is sent off to, hone his skills because he's already a fine, let's say a fine warrior, very skilled warrior. And he arrives on the Isle of Skye. He has to pass these various tests. If I can dredge up my memory, one is
just to get into the
crossing the plains of ill luck, and there's a bridge of some sort. I can't actually remember the names. And he performs these feats, and of course, on one level, they could represent, the journey of anybody struggling to attain a discipline. Also, I guess on a more elemental level, they could represent getting in touch with different aspects in nature, the elements, air, earth, water, fire, and their own inner willpower and that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so he gets there.
That he has to go through before he can get to Sgathach.
Yes, and he does arrive, and there are various versions, but I think the main one is that he is spotted by Sgathach's daughter, and she rather fancies him because he's a young man. Let's face it, he's very young, and he got his name even when he was a child. By killing a big hound with his bare hands, kind of thing.
So he's very strong and powerful.
And he's young and very athletic and attractive. Who knows? So he catches the eye of Sgathach's daughter, and I'm sort of blending a few stories here because I must admit they're all a bit together in my mind. And
but I think they do anyway. They do kind of intermix.
And the one I was reading just recently is told more, I guess, from a folklore, from stories from the Isle of Skye, and that was that he was snubbed almost. He got to the Isle of Skye and he wasn't really, oh, you're not special, just join the queue kind of thing. And he thought that was horrific. So,
because where he was from, he was seen as,
But there is a main traditional, because he was well known,
he was
very famous and feared.
Just checking in case he wasn't famous.
No, he was famous.
He was already famous. Okay,
but he was outrageous. He was sort of kind of a bit over the top warrior, and that's putting it mildly. But he in one of the stories, he actually approaches Sgathach and holds her a sword. He must overpower her somehow, and holds a sword to her breast and demands to be taught, and demands also, I think, to have her daughter to sleep with. Then there's another version where the daughter, I think it's pronounced Ulhak, which is a really hard word to pronounce.
Yes.
She fancies him, so there's a different sort of dynamic going on there. But the sense of it was that he's demanding some kind of tuition, and he's doing it at the point of a sword. And this is open to all kinds of interpretations from all kinds of different people. But of course, my interpretation has been looking at from a feminist perspective, and from the point of view of what the sword can represent, and from the warrior culture of the Irish at the time, the values of what a warrior culture have, and then also what it could symbolise, on a more symbolic level. So I've tried to look at all those things, but so he gets his tuition and earns.
So what do you believe that symbolised then?
The sword,
at her breast, like that?
I think it's a sort of, again, and it's like an over assertion, overtaking, especially because it was a demand, a show of strength, perhaps because he was very young, maybe even a teenager. I'm not sure what his age would have been, like an older teenager.
Because I feel
a blustering young man who thinks he owns the world, and you teach me. But it could also be that he's, some people would say that's the male energy, and I don't go in for that sort of interpretation.
But I feel like Sgathach could have overpowered him at any time. She was
the most ferocious, apart from Aoife, who was more ferocious.
So it almost, she was going to teach him. So I doubt that he could have actually overpowered her unless she was testing him or allowing it in some way. I don't know.
One of the interpretations is it shows his immaturity.
It
actually, from the male point of view of this initiate, he's immature and he's rash and over entitled and demanding. The sword itself is interesting. I don't really go into the symbolism of the sword, but I go into the obsidian knife, which is more harking back to the Stone Age, or I guess the Neolithic period, when they used stone weapons or stone tools, and how a sword would have evolved out of that eventually. But he gets his training from Sgathach.
For some reason, she decides she's going to train him.
She trains him. And then there are, again, different versions. There's usually, so they sleep together, mother and daughter, although daughter has also been conflated with Aoife sometimes, because they used to change things and insert parts of the story to please the culture back in the Middle Ages.
Because sometimes Aoife is
let's change this
as the sister,
or the enemy, of a neighbouring island, so not even of Skye. So there's various interpretations and layers of how they would have written, especially once it was being written down, told the story. and what characters were sort of useful for the story.
Yeah.
So Cuchulainn wins the or achieves somehow this standard and prize in, very briefly, of a weapon called the gay bolga. And I know that Lynn Wood interpreted or offered the interpretation that may have been an earlier goddess bolga of the lightning bolt, which is again another theme in my book.
Because this was an extremely terrifying kind of a
barbed
weapon, wasn't it? It could just
a harpoon sort of
through.
And I think it was a sort that you couldn't get out without further damaging the person.
Yeah.
But then there's Aoife comes into it where she's, in this version at least, she's an enemy or a more ferocious woman than Sgathach, who I will just pause here to say Sgathach is seen as a teacher in the mystery school. So she trained young male and female candidates in various things, and she's also said to have sons and a daughter, but there's never a mention of a partner or a husband or a king or anything like that. So my interpretation has been very much that she is very autonomous. The woman in mastery of her own life kind of.
And what was it you referred to her before as when I was asking about?
Oh, the mother of discernment.
The mother of discernment.
Yeah, and that's where I get into the sword imagery or the obsidian knife of discerning how to use your power. So going back to the story, Aoife is there's some kind of conflict going on between Sgathach and Aoife, and I think Sgathach actually doesn't want to send Cuchulainn out. She's possibly grown fond of him because she knows that Aoife is very ferocious.
And she clearly
very skilled.
She clearly sees something in him.
Yes, that's the implication.
For her to actually train him in the first place. As a mother of discernment. I mean, perhaps that was.
I mean, in my version, I would interpret that as being Sgathach is trying to convey a responsibility. In fact, if I can just pause to read Lynn's little statement that I found profound, was that Sgathach is an active principle who battles to bring her initiates to self-knowledge and responsible action. So that key of the responsible action is what I've latched onto.
So that may be a part of why she decided to do that, because he wasn't behaving responsibly, I guess, in the way that he was trying to force this, but she could see the power and the potential energy that he had, but wanted to teach him that taking responsibility for that power and energy
and what I understand of martial arts and the kind of, if you want to support the warrior ethic, is that the true warrior is highly controlled and responsible.
Martial arts, by the way, is another Mars Scorpio thing because of that control. And it's not just something for personal vengeance. So there's a contest or a battle with Aoife in the story, and Cuchulainn finds out about it, and I guess he's itching to fight. That seems to be because he wants to defeat her, but she's fairly unbeatable as her reputation goes, and he wants to know her weakness, and her weakness is her chariot and her charioteer. Now, the implication in some stories I've read is that the charioteer is actually a woman, so she's. And again, this is where I've addressed this sort of forced heterossexual narrative, is that why should it be a man? Why are they assuming that Aoife has a thing going with her charioteer who's a man? This is a place where women are very athletic and autonomous, and why not? So that's something I take up on too. But she fights with Cuchulainn, but I think he tricks her. The idea is that he tricks her by distracting her
referring to her horses or something.
Uh-huh.
And because she's so, loves her chariot and her horses, she is momentarily caught off guard, and he gets the upper hand.
Yeah. One version I think I read, he points up like as though they're about to come off a cliff or something like that. Look, what's that? And
that's right.
it's my horses and my chariot.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Yeah, so.
And then again, there's a different transmissions. He sort of asserts this demand for sex from these women and says, you'll do this, this and this and sleep with me kind of thing. So anyway, they do get together, Aoife and Cuchulainn in the story, and live together for about a year, I believe, and have a child. And so the child's name is Conla, and Cuchulainn leaves. And again, different versions and different that you hear of will say that Aoife was setting the gesh on her son. The one I heard was that it was Cuchulainn said when he comes to look for me, he must tell no one his name, and he wears this ring, and he does various things, and so cut a long story short, in the end he does go to search for his father, but he because he can't speak his name and his lineage, I guess, he isn't sort of spotted for who he is, and he's a fine warrior at the age of like 7 or something. This is very mythic, of course, but it does show you how embedded they were in this warrior culture, and that this was how he was going to gain his status in society. But unfortunately his father, Cuchulainn, he's married to Emer by this point, and she recognises the child just by the look of him, that, that's your son. And he's just won't hear of it. He has to go and fight. So he ends up killing his son. And my interpretation as well was that, the child of a relationship is almost like the fruit of the union, the fruit of that initiatory journey for Cuchulainn from those women, and whatever that really or mythologically contained was death. It didn't actually come to fruit. It was stopped by patriarchal culture that just got stronger and stronger. So it's kind of like, in a way, signifies what happened to the female centric culture that Sgathach and Aoife might have actually been at the end of, and sort of, in the middle of having to deal with a different culture, sort of that crossover time, which could be, it's mythologized, so it's a long period, but the child is killed by his father. So that, to me, is says so much about patriarchy,
patriarchal culture,
what patriarchy does for men. And of course we sort of know, as from a feminist point of view, and also feminism as an ongoing search for our own consciousness, is what it does for women, but it tends to silence women. So the one appealing thing about these goddesses I liked was that there wasn't a huge amount of information available, and I could just play with guessing and sort of experimenting with what it might mean. And also I did end up making up a few of my own stories to be slotted into a sort of what if past, before that, because the stories I think were set in the Iron Age period, of course. I'm not sure. I think I just can't remember the dates of when they were written down, but they were Iron Age stories.
Interesting, because it's like, to me, these sorts of the essence of the stories are being told in so many different cultures in so many different ways. And just if I think of Hera and Jupiter, for instance, I mean, their coming together was supposed to be, the great goddess cultures with the great god cultures to create something wonderful. And it's like I can almost see that as this coming together of Cuchulainn to coming together with Aoife and creating something that is a joining of the two.
Well, it's a potential
of it.
Yeah.
But eventually the patriarchal taking over and crushing it, which is exactly what happened with Jupiter and Hera. Or Juno, that Jupiter crushed that, didn't allow anything to be born or come from that joining. And it's like those types of stories, like they might appear on the surface to be very different, but it's still this attempt of this coming together that eventually is just overtaken by this patriarchal stuff, leading us to the world we live in today in many ways.
And I think with even with that idea of the potential there, so everything that he learnt from Sgathach and then went on to live with Aoife in a relationship, presumably, for a while. It sort of also echoes the story of Circe and Odysseus from the Odyssey, is that when he goes off for a year and lives and is initiated into all these mysteries with Circe, but what does he do? There's a sense of threat, and there's a sense of wanting to escape. I actually used to know the story of Circe because I did the Odyssey at school, and I know that there's something to do with turning the men into pigs, or she was.
I'm not much help with this one.
She was slighted in some way. But the parallel of a sojourn with a wise woman. And the other thing that's important with Sgathach is that her name means variously. You could say it's shadow or timid.
Yes.
So she's meant to be a mysterious woman. And she's in the other world. Yeah. And this is the thing that in my research, that the women of the cultures that we're talking about did have very different some freedoms and some status, but they were essentially in patriarchal cultures, and very warlike often too. But it wasn't necessarily honourable for a man to go off and learn from a woman in the actual culture of the time. Yeah. So she had to be some almost magical being in the other world. That was permissible. So it was okay to go off to the other world, which was over the sea to Skye, to learn from her. Yes. But you couldn't do it down the road in your neighbourhood sort of thing.
With just a regular woman, because
it was just that, again, probably a symptom of a changing, fluctuating period of a change of culture over long periods, that all the values were changing. What manhood was meant to be like, anything different to what women did basically was manhood. So that feeds into the sexual politics side of the story, and so Sgathach is she's got this sort of sense of being very mysterious and otherworldly. And so, therefore, of course, there has to be, to me anyway, especially writing my story, there has to be a clue or a portal to talk about more cosmic forces, because we're talking about, you could call her a mythic woman or a goddess, as in what sort of guidance can she give us?
Yeah, and that's what I think
for the mythic force, for the forces of life.
Yeah, and that I guess is the next point I really wanted to get to is how we can kind of use these stories to work with in our lives today, what that means to us as women, in particular today, but not just women, for everybody, but particularly as women, how we can use those.
Yes, well, that's basically what my books are about.
Yeah, exactly.
So I I have lots of layers, of course. So on a very practical layer, when in the early books, the young initiates happen to be young men at that point. There's a young woman that comes into it as well, but not all young either.
No.
It depends when they become conscious of wanting to go deeper.
Yeah, because this happens for all of us at different stages in our lives. And I think quite often for women in particular, we go through a real transition around that age of menopause as well, where we suddenly want to look at things, so much deeper than before. And it's not to say that young women don't too, because of course that's true. But everyone has these different stages, don't they, where they just suddenly go like...
Yeah. So that's right. And again, I try within the limitations of not writing, more and more and more, and then it would just become too much. They're long enough as it is, but is that there are different age groups in their little sort of community, ranging from the children to the oldest one who passes. She's not in necessarily in the community, Freya, the character of Freya, but she's in her 90s, and she was actually a lover of Sarah, the one who created the system. But when they start mentoring, when Roshin starts mentoring, she starts out with two young men, really, and they are, just happen to be the sorts of people that are interested in knowing a bit more, interested in the pagan side of it. Obviously, paganism can be appealing to anybody. And she is trying to introduce I guess you'd call it critical thinking. Also a more looking at how they've been conditioned in their attitudes to, I guess, relationships, how they see themselves and what they how they see themselves as young men, how they view women, they're
opening their eyes to what sort of things in society, I guess, has gone together to make them have those thoughts and ideas, so they can question.
Just to question the double standards of where they are, and just to start that process, and also to introduce slowly the deeper aspects, like with when you were referring earlier to the image of the woman dancing with the fire skirt. My immediate thought was that the woman or the person is in the centre, and she's balancing the fire, literally, and also just the skill of dance. So as Sgathach, as a woman of battle or a struggle can be a discipline, an academic study or a dancer or there's another character who does parkour in the story. So that's an aspect of that kind of more the discipline of the body, but there's also the discipline of the mind, because I was thinking to make it relevant to everybody, what if there was people who had physical disabilities, like how would Sgathach relate to them? So when we're stepping away from the obvious martial kind of war associations, which are good to look at too.
But it's the same with all astrology. When I'm doing astrology, I talk about that. You can have certain aspects that represent things, but there is such a huge range of how that can be presented, and that's kind of what you're doing here with this Sgathach energy. There's so many ways it can actually be made, manifest, for want of a better word, but into your life.
Because the things that I focused on to get it into my own head was that these. For both of the sister enemy, I prefer to call them sisters. Because I don't want women to always be fighting with each other, even though they do. It doesn't mean we have to stick to that narrative. We can have a different narrative. Sisters can argue just as much as anyone. But it's that sense of a dynamic and different aspects. But with Sgathach, I was talking about the flaming skirt. So she was sort of in the middle, and everything was moving, not sort of. It's stable, but not the same. So there's like a flow happening. And so the three main things that I thought about with Sgathach was the management of three areas of life that are really powerful, and they're the ones that cause all the trouble. The instinct of aggression, or what they call the combative instinct, hunger and survival instinct, and sex, arousal, and how we manage, you know, especially when we're young. And this was one of the things for the young men, you know, and the women. This is what I try to, in various ways, introduce, that, you know, that how you grow into your sexual being and cope with the arousal. And for men, don't learn to overtake or rape, assault. But
very good advice. Don't rape.
Yes. And then there's the violence, the combative instinct. And again, this goes back a long time ago to a conversation I had with Lynn about this sort of thing, that they're, with the triple spiral, these things are connected. Everything is actually connected. But what we do is we have boundaries around it. So we have the combative instinct and the sexual instinct must not merge. And her sort of teaching to me was that Sgathach, that's what she taught, was how to have the appropriate activities that didn't merge. Sexual violence, or even violence in sex, as a lot of people, of course, say is okay if you choose it. You know, that's a whole other discussion, which I do go into in my books. But it's like these are really powerful life, almost like cosmic forces that play out in our bodies. And then so the next layer,
like men in a patriarchal system, particularly back a long time ago, and it feeds through to now. We're never taught to separate these two energies.
No, they were often,
sex and violence were seen in the same thing.
Particularly for the enemy.
Both Mars kind of ruled things, and they, instead of expressing them in these separate areas, they allowed them to
having appropriate contexts. And also in the idea of the warrior, that the rape was often only acceptable if it was the enemy. It was a very othering and very the power over, and of course rape of your own people, which would be the men raping their own women, is also what happens in society and in patriarchal societies. So,
and we see that even now in so many countries where war is
absolutely.
Women are so often
it's a weapon.
Victim of rape through war. Now today, so this is still really important, valid stuff that
and that was the big, those two. Then there was survival, and how I thought that relates to the sexual area and the combative instinct. So you'll get people doing desperate things for survival, or being coerced and forced to survive. That the only way they can survive is that they have to participate in certain activities that blur the sort of healthy boundaries of these forces that manifest through our bodies. And then what I wanted to mention,
we saw that like gladiators and things like that, where slaves were forced to fight each other to the death, otherwise they would themselves be killed. So again, it's a real
so that kind of
that Mars Scorpio energy is being used in its
it can be extrememely traumatic and destructive, and not something you want to base a society around.
No.
And that's the whole, again, another thread through the story that I use. Sgathach and Aoife kind of, I'll talk about Aoife in a minute too, but with Sgathach, those sort of triple aspects, then on a deeper level, I try to say how they relate to cosmic forces. So, survival is almost like that impulse to life, that there is an impulse to life always happening, but there also is cosmic violence, but it's not the same as human violence. It's it's you're talking about like stars exploding, the way the Earth's crust moves. It's destructive. If there's a forest and full of life that may suffer because of that new creative episode, but these are not human. We can't attach human values to an earthquake, say. So that's like another deeper layer of this triple aspected resonance. And so the sex and the survival.
Get this connection's clear in my mind. So what you're saying, like for instance, with like an earthquake or something, this is a creative expression that comes out destructively, and it's important
they're
that we
intertwined,
and it's important that we don't then go, well that's how nature does it, it's okay for us to have destructive creative
that's
things.
exactly
is that what
right
we're saying?
So because human,
just wanted to make sure that piece together.
we have let's for example go with anger, especially women's anger, men's anger too, but we'll talk about women. As women's anger has been very much suppressed. And one of the things also that I learnt through Lynn was about, the warrior women, if you like, because she spoke about warrior women. Not only Sgathach, but she mentioned Maeve and Morrigan, is that the power of that transformative force, which anger is saying something is not right. Boundaries are being violated. Is that obviously, I guess, what happens if you don't access it, it can actually get out of hand, which is also part of the training that Sgathach would have offered, that responsible action. So that force can be quite an impulse to create, actually. I get enraged about things that happen in the world, the injustice of the system.
As we should be enraged.
But the thing is,
to use that,
what am I going to do with that? That's the mother of discernment. That's the obsidian knife, which is a volcanic rock.
That's very nicely said.
How am I going to use this tool? And so I talk about tools more than weapons, because I guess the tool becomes a weapon when it's misused. And occasionally people will say, I guess, that occasionally it is appropriate to use a weapon. And in a life and death fight, when you've got the next tribe over the hill coming at you, you are going to fight for your life. So that's an appropriate context. Because if you basically keep to your pure, peaceful sense, you will probably just all get slaughtered. Which is what happened, I guess, to some extent with the cultures of old Europe, the matriarchal cultures and the more peaceful cultures.
And with no one to continue those teachings and to continue that line of thought, then patriarchal overthrowers gets to just continue to grow and grow. So it's important to have that being able to go no.
But ultimately, as they say, and it's probably even in the Bible, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Because there is only really one outcome from that way, and that's death. And that's, again, what Conla, the son of Aoife and Cuchulainn, to me represents that logical conclusion of that way. So there's lots of, I try to bring in lots of layers with Sgathach and Aoife. I bring in
many layers.
I bring in the relationship layer because she has that relationship with Cuchulainn, and she has a child. And so Sgathach is a mother too. But Aoife's, there's a different resonance there. So it's about nurturing an infant, which is much more about, again, and this is where I started to learn. I'd already started the series, but I was looking at my own parenting and value system, and then I learned about the gift logic from Genevieve Vaughan and how that contrasted with exchange logic, and so that crystallized so much about what I was actually trying to express. But the infant, the rearing of an infant, especially even if it's by yourself or in a community, is about giving to needs without expectation of return.
Yeah.
And so the story of Aoife and raising her child, and then Cuchulainn leaves, and you don't know what's going on.
No,
you can only imagine. But ultimately he goes because that was the agreement, that he goes off and looks for his father. And I see that as very much, very, very relevant to women throughout patriarchy, but women who've had to conform to protect their children. In fact, that's kind of the biggest coercion. You become complicit because you're trying to protect your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're not going to just leave them out for the wolves. And so there's a lot of grief in that. But there's also, like with everything, there's a creative essence that sits in potential, which relates back to the cosmic forces, that because there's always creation and destruction together.
Yeah.
So there's never just, it's all happy and wonderful.
Oh, yeah.
There's always things going on. I guess I tend to think of it as very earthy. There's always movement going on in the earth, and churning and decomposing and transforming. And then we just see the kind of surface of it all. So these goddesses have helped me look at layers and how they can relate to lots of different aspects of our lives, ordinary lives, but also drawing in the biggest picture, the planet and the relationship with the sun, and the other planets, and the cosmic reality itself.
Yeah, it all sort of ties in together, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I'm very excited about, I just want to quickly talk about something else.
Have a sip of water.
I know that you're currently working on another book, which is almost like a bit of almost an instruction manual, if you like, for, well, I don't know if they're the right words, but describing the Pictish spirit, this whole system that Sarah's created in the novel. You're working on another book. I wanted to talk about that, aren't you?
In a way, it was like paring it down to just that, without all the characters around it. Because in the story, the characters flesh it out and have lives. And yes, of course, there's a layer of it sounds wonderful. They hardly ever have arguments, that kind of thing. Yeah. But I think that actually does happen sometimes. Yeah. I mean, I'm not really an argumentative person myself.
No, I don't think we've ever had an argument, have we?
No. But it's also, I wanted to try and go deeper into my reasoning, and then I sort of thought, well, is that a bit much? Who cares?
No. I think it's a wonderful idea, because for people that perhaps are not big on novels or stories, but they find the concepts that you're exploring as really interesting concepts and ideas. I think having this kind of Pictish spirit book just about what the whole sort of system is about could be really beneficial.
Yeah, I like the word system actually, because it is like anything. I guess it's a set of tools, and because of the Scottish ancestry, and particularly focusing on the women. And I think that's what captured my imagination long ago, because even though I was never really into the whole warrior thing, it was the fact that these were women. And what were they doing there? Well, why did they become these mythic figures and have this reputation? And because my name actually means strong warrior, I'm like, okay, I'm going to explore this. Yes. So that's how I did it, and it's become a very rich a structure, a system for me,
Yeah.
and I have built on it. So
I'm very excited about this one coming out.
Yeah.
Are there going to be any more of the actual novel stories?
Well,
there's still more to come.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm planning two
more.
and then I hope that will be all.
Two more of the stories.
Yes.
And plus we've got this other one you're working on the side.
Yes.
That's just a bit about the thing. I'm going to grab the other novels off the shelf so we can show everyone what's available.
Yes. Over in the library. Oh my gosh, they look so big and heavy.
How great is this? You know? This is amazing. I'm just going to hold that. Look, this is Louise's masterpiece.
My hobby.
Now, I don't know if I mentioned in the introduction too that Louise is also a wonderful artist. I don't know if I mentioned the art, and I've actually got a couple of pieces of her art hanging on the walls in my house too. So that's another thing that you might be
I didn't do
checking out.
Most of the art. I did the artwork for Ice. That was my own image. And that, if I may say,
the first book. We'll just go one by one. This is Mist. So this is the first in the series.
And the image is Lynn's art, Lynn Sinclair Wood, and I loved it for Mist because of the bisexual colours, the initiating woman, and the sort of Celtic suggestion of Celtic or pre-Celtic male, and the labyrinth, because life is a labyrinth.
And you have the original.
I do actually, yes. Yeah. So that's a very special cover, that one for me.
So that was first, and then we go to this
Wind,
one.
yes.
This is Wind. Whoops.
So Wind is kind of gets a bit deeper into things, and it's again touching on the elements, like everything's stirred up and imagine autumn and the wind gushes in and all the leaves and everything's just moved around. Transformations are happening, and the characters are getting to know each other more and learning more about the lore of Sgathach and Aoife and the other goddesses, which I haven't talked about, of course, today.
We'll have another another one on that.
And this is flowers. And that's another one of Lynn's, and I particularly like the antlered woman because Sgathach has resonances with being a deer priestess. And I like that idea of her being able to, run in the wild and being on the island and living in with herds and knowing when's the correct time to hunt and all those kinds of aspects. You could just get really quite broad and it just resonates. So I did a lot of research about the actual geology of the island and tried to see how I could relate Sgathach to the black Cullen and Aoife to the red Cullen and the glacial moraine field of Sgathach, I think that's how it's said, the river and the valley between the two.
So there's a great deal of research that's gone into these stories too, and a great deal of your own insights and things around these particular goddesses too. So now we've got Storm.
Yep, and that sort of, to me, picks out things that happen in the novel, in the other world, in the what's called the White Country. And so I won't say any more because I don't like giving away the story.
No, you can't give away too much of the story.
It's really frustrating.
But it's nice to just see. And this is the one that you did actually do the artwork.
Yes, I did this artwork.
This one, didn't you?
And this one is a map of a part of the Black Cullen, which features the Coriolangan, which is where, in the beginning of the book, Adam has his experience.
Wow.
And so I try to just layer everything. Everything has a meaning and a resonance. And sometimes it's got to the point where I don't even know I'm doing it, but I've immersed myself in it so much
that it's just happens.
Yeah. So I just wanted to get back quickly to Aoife because talking about the mothering and that touching on the gift logic, and I thought that's really interesting contrast with the values of. It's really interesting from a feminist point of view to look at how we understand perhaps the warrior culture and what their value is and what they would see as, deserving or justify their battling, their conquests, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Very much ties in with the exchange logic.
Yes.
Because that is what really characterises patriarchy, whereas the gift logic is characterised very much by just giving to needs. And
because many people think of of exchange logic.
Exchange logic
as being like monetary exchange, but it's not necessarily monetary exchange.
Well,
it can be anything that you exchange. I will give you this if you will give me that.
For that.
Whereas gift logic is not about any kind of exchange whatsoever. It's not about bartering, or it's not about anything like that. It's like you have a need, and I will give you what you need.
And the interesting thing that came out with writing. And questioning, the character's question, that's what the mentoring sessions are about, is how this can be achieved and what boundaries are appropriate and how you can have boundaries with gift logic and does it then become exchange, because exchange is kind of grows out of gift in a way. But it's really it's another layer to all of these things. And I have, that's why I wanted to write the other book, because I wanted to go a bit more into the, I guess, I don't know if you could call it philosophical, but the books themselves are a bit that way, I would say. But I wanted to focus
these
more.
philosophies and things come out through the eyes of the characters as they're learning and developing, whereas in this newer sort of book will be more about just the philosophies within themselves.
And even sets of questions that might have already occurred to people, but they've occurred to me, so I thought, well, I'll have to start with my own questioning and to promote that thinking, because I think particularly at the moment in the world there seems to be a great fear of questioning, and yet it's a not it might end up changing our viewpoints, but it's not really a threatening thing. I'm going back to the story of the Arthurian stories of the Grail, seeking the Grail. It was the Grail question that liberates, and you could say that any question, the right question is the Grail question.
Liberate.
It liberates something, knowledge, potential, and again, these things always for me tie back into this triple aspected part of how I've thought about Sgathach as a mentor and a teacher, is the dynamic between that combative instinct, survival instinct, and the sexual instinct or the arousal, and what you're going to do with those, and how that resonates, because it's also about what in the pagan and the goddess cultures they talk about, the life-death-life cycle. So it's this constant rolling of forces, which are cosmic. But in the human realm, we need to be very conscious in order to have functional societies. And that's why we have moral ethic systems that say, well, that's not acceptable. Because it's all very well. We do have an impulse for freedom and liberation, but the freedom is always within limitations. That's actually quite a good explanation for Sgathach. Freedom within limitations. How do I exert my autonomy within the limitations of being part of a society and part of a community.
Which comes down to her being the mother of discernment.
Yes,
because she
exactly.
discerns what, how she can navigate that, I guess, in the most useful ways. This has been a really exciting conversation.
I'm still wanting to say something about Aoife.
More.
Well, okay. Well, this could be the last thing, but
let's wind up Aoife. We'll have more of these, so don't worry. We'll have more of these conversations about.
Well, Aoife, being again that I've called her again one of her epithets, mother of fruitfulness in my little prayer that I write. I think it's Sgathach, mother of discernment, Aoife, mother of fruitfulness, Bridget. Actually can't remember. This is terrible. I should have looked it up. And Sgathach is sun radiant mother. Now some people might think Sgathach, sun radiant mother, but I have formulated that for a purpose. But Aoife,
we will have a whole episode on Sgathach. So
but Aoife is, because she's a mother, and again, as I emphasised, that initial period of rearing an infant. Particularly, she's meant to be a really ferocious warrior, and I think, what does that actually mean? I think, what is a mother? Mothers are ferocious, protective.
They are.
Well, I know, you're going to stand by your child. You have this impulse to foster them into adulthood, to see them survive. You also are a sexual being because you've had a child, and if you're healthy and obviously survived that process, you would want to continue having those kinds of experiences if you can. And there's, to me, the ferocity is very appropriate to the mother.
Absolutely. I think a mother protecting her young is the most ferocious human being I think you're ever going to come
animals
across, if they are trying to protect their children.
We just have to look at what even birds do when you go near their or magpies at the moment. There's this, their kind of behaviours. But so there's a sense that that's not a contradiction. That her ferocity and her mothering are not necessarily, opposite extends, because even if you can be completely nurturing and ferocious about that, because that's what I've found in my experience of being very committed to a perspective or a logic, trying to, before I even understood what I was trying to do, came across as extremist to some people and to my ex-partners. and so I thought, okay, that's a quality of Aoife that I can relate to.
Absolutely.
I mean, there might only be a couple of occasions when you stand there sort of with your spear and your shield and go, don't you dare to whoever's
fortunately,
approaching.
It's not something that we have to do often in most cases, but I think pretty much all mothers will relate to that image.
And then the process that unfolds from that child, and not necessarily the child in the myth, because I don't actually go much into the male side, the Cuchulainn side. There's a bit of discussion about it, but it's more about the powerful messages of these two women, these two goddesses, that they can really, especially for women, but I think not only, I think if men is certainly, and that's what I try to portray in my books. There are these wonderful men that are so open to all this stuff, and that's on purpose, because I want to know that men aren't born fixed, and they don't pop out with fully armoured.
This stuff is taught, and that's the difference, I guess. As feminists, that's the difference that we need to try and create in this world, is to be able to undo and prevent this kind of stuff to be continue to be being taught forevermore.
It's a big challenge. It is. It's like the tasks of to get to the island of Skye, and even just the concept of climbing those, those mountains, because in my next novel I want to actually explore that side of it. I'm going to tackle that. I have to do a lot of research. I can't actually do it myself, and I'm past that.
But mentally, you can certainly climb those mountains.
And what, as a metaphor, that can mean in the story, but also literally what it means. So I don't... I like to keep things grounded so that there can be a literal way of understanding it, and then the metaphor, and again, as I said, connect to that sort of cosmic drive or impulse that is always present, but we haven't, until I got into earth-based spirituality and goddess spirituality, there was no narrative for me to understand it. And I think that that's another reason why I wanted to write stories, because I wanted to give people a new story to tell or to think about. And I wanted to tell that story to myself. Obviously that was the first impulse, and it was like, I need a new story. Well, you've got to write it.
Write it and give it to the world. So, how can people get to your books? That's the next question. Tell us about that.
Well, they're available through, depending on where you are in the world, through Book Depository and Amazon. I know a lot of people don't like Amazon, but I published through KDP, and interestingly enough, was not very well versed in all these corporate things when I late came to the internet. It was only in 2015. It's not very long ago. So they are available with Amazon and other places, but the best pricing, and they are a bit more expensive because they are thick, heavy books.
They're big books,
I have to say. So they're not your sort of, they're more expensive to buy,
which is natural. But I think they're the sort of book that you really take your time over and sink yourself into and analyse and think as you're going to. They're not meant to be a quick little read, so they need to be big and deep in order to take you to the place that you're intending to take the reader to. So,
and that was why I self-published too, because I wanted to have a bit of control over that, and regardless of whether it's high literature, it's not. It's just a really powerful impulse that I had to tell this story, and that is really what I thought. No, that's what I'm going to do. So, so that they are available to buy, and you can get them in an ebook, I believe, Kindle.
Excellent. So Amazon or
from me if you're local.
Or locally. And what about your other ways of seeing some of your artwork? I know you've got a couple of different Facebook pages about different things.
Yes, I've got the Picture Spirit page, which is about the book and subjects that are related to the themes of the book.
So that's a great one to follow if you want to more political hear about that kind of stuff.
And then I have Half of the Antlered Mother, which is been a bit neglected lately because of my circumstances.
So Half of the Antlered Mother. So
that's where I have wanted to explore more about the more women-centred, mother-centred gift logic, and also the deer, the tradition and the mythology of women, of the deer, and how. And then I've got Egg and Serpent Studio, which is my art page.
So Egg and Serpent Studio, so the art page.
And that's, again, a bit neglected lately. But, I have moved house twice in 12 months.
Louise has got some beautiful, beautiful artwork, so that's absolutely worth following and having a look at too.
Thank you, darling. And then there's just me, my page.
Lovely.
My normal page, which I tend to be a bit shy on, funnily enough. I'm much more bold on Picture Spirit. Just
there you go.
So
wonderful. Do you have any final winding up points that you'd like to make?
Well, Yeah, I think that the thing with the mythology and the goddesses is, and I think you spoke about this with Athena in your first podcast, was to really question and think about the, particularly the patriarchal, I will say patriarchal culture surrounding it, and how it came to be, because there are stories that, of course, have been lost, perhaps not even written down, but that existed before that, and very different stories with very different agendas and values that we have to train ourselves to imagine and teach ourselves to think in different images, different symbols, different metaphors and language. So I would suggest not being afraid to ask questions, to doubt, to check out different versions of stories, because I think by comparing versions you get more of a sense of, like the one that I like of the story of Sgathach is where she is so angry that Cuchulainn beat her daughter in a combat that she came down to fight him for 3 days. 3 days. Now, this is another interesting thing. And he, neither of them could best the other. They were equals, really.
But neither would give it up.
That's right. And so what happened was the daughter then is thinking, oh, no.
This is going to go on forever.
What are we going to do? And she keeps trying to tempt them away. She brings them the milk of the deer to drink, but no, they're not stopping. Then she roasts a deer. And she's the smell is luring. That smells good. No, not stopping. So in the end, she stuffs the deer with hazelnuts and roasts it. And Sgathach thinks, the wise hazelnut will teach me how to defeat Cuchulainn. And Cuchulainn thinks, the wise hazelnut will teach me how to defeat Sgathach. And they sit down to eat, and they realise that when they sit to commune, they can't beat each other, and they'll become partners.
The wisdom,
and that is not a mainstream story that I've heard of, and I really like that one because it shows, just because it's positive, it shows that men and women can work it out. They just have to both want to
as equals
and eat the wise hazelnuts.
Absolutely, I like that.
So that's got a lot more interesting aspects that. To explore.
So more wisdom like that. If you follow dear Louise on the Pictish Spirit Facebook page, you'll get lots of little pieces of wisdom like that. And don't forget about the books. And of course, if you would like to have an astrology reading with me or participate in any
very good astrologer
course, then you can find me at theastrologyparlour.com, and you can follow my Facebook page too, The Astrology Parlour. So I think we'll wrap it up there. We're certainly going to be getting together again to talk about all this kind of stuff in the future. I'd like to do this probably once a month if we can try.
And I was worried I wouldn't have anything to say.
There's still so much more to say. So we'd like to obviously look at some of these other goddesses and maybe go a bit deeper with some of these ones again. There's so much we can talk about. If you're watching this on YouTube, please don't forget to subscribe and press the like button and press the bell so you get your notifications. And if you're listening to it as a podcast, please subscribe there too so you get to hear all of the news as we go along. And don't forget to comment, and if there's anything you particularly would like us to talk about, let us know. So,
thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you for letting me go on about my books.
Oh, no, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk about this with you. So, and to share some of our, these are some of our everyday conversations.
Yes.
So it's really nice to share some of our everyday conversations with everybody else.
Yep.
And thank you, Louise, and thank you everyone for joining us. And we'll see you again soon. Bye.